So I guess we'll get started here. Welcome to the conversation today at SmithGroup. We're thankful that you joined us to talk about a more holistic approach as we all return to our office and start planning that return. And while our team's developing guidelines for all of the physical modifications that have to take place, we're really focused on how do we create an experience for employees that's not unlike the one they left, one that goes beyond restrictions and what employees can't do to one that focuses on experience. So as we get started today, we'll introduce ourselves, but I wanted to point out that we do want this to be interactive, and at the end of this session, we're going to be taking questions from you all. So there's a questions feature in the WebEx, and if you'll use that to ask us questions as we go, we'll save all the questions for the end and we'll address them then. So we've put together our firm's national leadership and our workplace team to share with you what we're working on. So I'm Lise Newman, an architect. I'm director of our workplace practice.
Good afternoon, I'm Bob Varga. I'm a design principal in our firm. I focus on workplace and help lead the workplace practice from the design point of view.
Hello, my name is Alexis Kim. I am workplace strategy leader for our practice at SmithGroup.
And my name is Robert Moylan. I am the corporate director of interiors for SmithGroup.
So today, really three areas. We're going to share a little bit about what's framing some of the thoughts behind our approach, and then dive into the actual framework that we're developing as well. And then, as mentioned earlier, save the last 20 minutes or so for questions to have conversation with you all. So I think, you know, in thinking about this, our team has been focused on the fact that the one thing that we know is that we really don't know what work is going to look like 4 months from now, let alone a year from now. So flexibility is really the key to success. We know that from our perspective, it's really all about the people. And we want to think about going back into our workplaces with flexibility to be sure that we have the best experience possible, and that it's going to change over time. It'll be a matter of trial and error, but we wanted to put together a framework to be flexible for that. So really the heart of the matter is supporting all aspects of well-being. While the physical environment is very important, equally important are the mental and social aspects of our employees' lives. So we really want to anchor this conversation today, considering all three of these areas. So what actually is included in a holistic approach to returning to our offices? First of all, there's been a real shift in what's going on in real estate, given the fact that people have been successful working from home. So we want to spend a little time about what does that mean for the future of our workplaces. Physical space and protocols, that's probably what you've been most focusing on, as have we. But then also important to a successful return into our workplaces are developing policy and process to give employees guidance when they re-enter the physical workplace that they left. Human and social concerns, really in terms of an effective return to work, we have to be very careful and closely align the workspace with the concerns of our employees. And last but not least is managing change, helping employees back to the transition of returning to work, just like we would for a new building. It can't just be you show up, we need to help prepare them. So we'll talk about that as well. So in terms of real estate and the implications, SmithGroup reached out to some key clients and got some survey responses. And we were really surprised to learn that 67% of our clients that responded to the survey are going to allow employees to work from home more often after COVID. So this is going to be huge in terms of policy changes that will happen in all of our workplaces. And almost half plan to implement a staggered approach so that not everyone will be in the office at the same time. And that is also going to take a lot of management. And then beyond our own survey, according to some outside sources, Collier's, for example, 70% of people will want to continue to work at home at least one day a week. And 61% of employees have considered leaving because it lacked work flexibility. So these are the kinds of choices that employees are expecting in the future. And we all need to rethink, how we deal with this. What might have been a very limited telework policy before may now be a huge effect in the office. So we've often talked about giving employees choice in our workplace, and to have an effective office environment, we need to provide a variety of places, from personal workstations, offices, to shared common spaces and amenity spaces. And now we're asking ourselves, does choice now include working from home? This is a question every organization is going to need to answer. So to help our clients who've come to us really with the question, where do we start? We thought it would be helpful to develop a framework around returning to our workplaces. And just like any project, one of the most important things to do initially is determine the right problem that we're trying to solve for. So step one in this process is really a discovery process. Establishing the team within your organization, from leadership, HR, IT, legal, corporate real estate, and your design partners to really help you be successful and go through this entire process. And then secondly, in this discovery process, for us to really think about holistic return to the workplace, we need to understand what employees are thinking and feeling. And so we're recommending that we do a survey of all employees for understanding what are the inhibitors and the enablers for them to be able to return to work, and establishing a timeline. And so once these overarching kind of guidelines are established and we understand the workforce and their mindset, we move on to the physical space, defining the physical requirements. We've developed some tools to help you with that, an occupancy calculator, that once you know how many people plan to return to work, how those people can be integrated into the floor plans. Also determining phasing, special risk points in your workplace, as well as tools to kind of put this all together spatially. We also have developed space scenarios for workstations and offices, the me space, as well as the we space of meeting spaces, amenity spaces, and MEP guidelines. So speaking of guidelines, with the physical space sort of underway, we move on to policy and process. Very important that we give our employees some guidance as they return to the new workplace. And we talked earlier about managing change, considering the human and social factors identified in the survey, outlining an actual change management program, identifying opportunities for returning to work becoming even better than the workplace that we left.
So the discovery phase is critical because it's going to create alignment, perspective, and expectations. One thing that we've all recognized is that, and you probably see it just in your own organizations or even in your home, is the fact that people have different perspectives based on what they've read. In some cases, what we found is that we might have a leader that is like, absolutely, we're coming back. As soon as our state allows it, we're coming back. And of course, we're not going to make people wear masks. Why would we do that, right? And conversely, in the same organization, another leader might be saying, well, we're not going to come back for a year. So how do you align those different perspectives? And so that discover phase becomes critical because it does that. So it aligns those expectations. So setting up that team becomes really critical in this context. Having the leadership there to really kind of hear firsthand and to understand firsthand, not only from an endorsement point of view, but that it's really coming from them becomes really important. The second one is bringing in human resources. There's a lot of decisions that are policy-based in this context that really are important. Same with legal. Some of the decisions are legal in nature, especially when there's conflicting requirements from different parts of society. Information technology, HR might say that people want flexibility, and so HR is going to say everybody needs to get a laptop. IT might say, wait a minute, time out. It's going to take us 12 months to get everybody a laptop just from the way we need to roll it out. So having everybody on the same page becomes important. Corporate real estate and how much space is needed moving forward is relevant. And then having a workplace design partner, hopefully us, but the idea of having somebody there with you to work with you is critical. So in case you didn't catch it, from what we've sent out and what the discussion was and what Lise was bringing up, our point of view is that for it to be successful, reentry into the office really needs to be human-centric. So if that being the case, you start with the employees, right? And so as Lise mentioned, our is a survey, a global survey. And so on the next page, what we start to show is the results of a possible global survey of all the staff. So in the context of this slide, what we're showing with this organization, what we found was that 66% of the respondents were anxious. And this is a survey that's a little over a week old, by the way. We're anxious about coming back into the office. So this type of information is invaluable because it starts to set the stage for what the move becomes. So 30% of the respondents found remote collaboration difficult, right? Those become really big factors in considering what the office looks like when we do come back. So global survey, really important. It also builds engagement with the staff. The next thing you need to do is to start to ask why. Maybe this sounds a little or like obvious, or why would we ever ask this question? But you really need to ask yourself, why are we coming back? So the survey establishes the mood and kind of identifies the mood from the employees and gets the current challenges. Then the leadership says, so why are we coming back? Based on the survey results, what we might find is that that collaboration is a really big challenge. And so the leadership then might say, so we're going to come back because we need to collaborate effectively, right? There's this kind of cause effect. So what is your why as an organization? Why are you coming back? Don't just let it be because that's what we're supposed to do, but really challenge yourselves to ask that question. If we're going to be human-centric, the user experience really has to be positive. So this image that we're showing you here, don't do this. If we're putting red X's on furniture or furniture, right, and saying don't sit here, think about the implication of what that means. What we really want is for all of our staff to come back motivated, positive, and we want to reinforce that rather than building on the fears that they might already have. So making sure that the experience is positive sets the stage for a successful reentry. If I'm reminded that maybe my relative died every time I see a red X on a chair or a white X on the chair next to me, or that my neighbor is in the hospital because of COVID, right? That it's not the message that we want to send, and it's not the behavior, and not the behavior, wrong word, that perception that we want to reinforce. And then finally, from our perspective, we did develop like 5 high-level goals to guide the process. These are our point of view. They're high level enough that they're likely to fit every organization. So the first one is be safe. Probably obvious, but let's just remind ourselves that coming back, we need to do everything we can to make those offices safe. The next one is be human. If it's going to be human-centric, remember that people are more than just a number or a name, but that they are our friends, they're our coworkers, they're our right, they're people. 3 is be flexible. Just remember that, be effective, and you'll equitable. Recognize that, let's make sure that that staff, even if they're working from home still, are able to really be equal rather than second-class citizens. These high-level goals, they might be different. They might have a different ranking if you were to kind of prioritize them for different organizations, but we feel that they're relevant for each.
And so, armed with the information from the discovery phase, we would recommend entering into the physical space, potential redesign, and what the actual tactical protocols and operation of the office would be. So a few other things to keep in mind, although this is all encompassing right now, this is a temporary situation. We don't know if it's 3 months or a year, but this will end. So it's important to be cognizant of that when redesigning your space. You know, the investment you may make in architecture or furniture may affect how much you can do to the space. Also, the amount of people ready and willing to come back is a big factor. That potentially there may not be many things you need to do, but I think with everything that's out there and everything that's been read and recommended, I think the most important thing is that for this to be successful for your company, for it to be a true empathetic and human experience, now, there is no one size that fits all. There is no official objective playbook for every organization. There are guidelines and principles that we'll go through, but really that discovery process helps you to tailor which recommendations you should take from which sources. So we talked about an initial employee survey, and we found that taking a second one was important as well. That was really more focused on why you would not want to come back to the office. These are a few of the kind of most of these are a majority of the reasons why, be it child care or elder care. The concern about public transit, if you take it, you know, everyone's worried about what happens in their office, but it's really important for you to think about the employee from the time they leave where they live to get to the office. You know, is a big part of this consideration on whether to go back to work. Anyone with pre-existing conditions, you know, there are HIPAA rules in place, and so you may not understand the percentage of staff you have that really shouldn't be out. And then finally, to be okay with just saying, you know what, I just don't feel like going, and that just needs to be, at least for this temporary time, enough of a reason to allow employees to work remotely.
So we developed a calculator that just gives you an idea of what this is going to look like from an occupancy perspective if you come back. So what we said is we kind of broke this up into 3 companies just to give you kind of a baseline where you can fit in, and you can do the math yourselves as well, or we can provide you this calculator. But the idea is to identify the total staff count. So in company 1, let's just say they have 80 people. And then based on the survey that Rob just mentioned, you're going to get a handle on the number of employees that are really unable to come to work because they're high risk in a vulnerable population, or maybe they're taking care of mom and dad or a sibling or a child that is immunocompromised and they have to stay home, or maybe they're just emotionally, from a well-being perspective, need to stay home. So you plug in the percentage of your staff that is in that category based on the survey results, right? Or based on conversations with HR, or a combination. The next one, the people that might have children, or maybe it's because of another factor that's really specific to your organization that's relevant to pull out and separate, that says this is why in the short term these folks need to continue at home. Daycare hasn't started, etc. So you plug in that percentage. So in company 1, right, we have 32 people that now need to work from home and aren't going to be coming back in the short term. Short term, what that definition is, we'll discuss. The staff then that is willing and able to come back is 48. But what we're finding already in conversations with even our own staff and with clients is that there's a percentage of staff that is recognizing the need for some flexibility, that they're going to come into the office one day a week, 2 days a week, but for various reasons, they can't commit to every day. And so identifying that percentage of the flexible workforce is relevant because it does affect the total count that you need. And you'll see why in a second, why that's really important. So for company 1, 36 out of 80 people would be coming back in initial return.
And so to speak a little bit about the tactical guidelines, we've developed these 5 metrics to consider when looking at your space. We think they are essentially a baseline. Obviously, there's more that can and should be done, but we do feel this should be the minimum when considering any kind of re-entry and looking at your office layout. The first is to identify the key risk points. That's everything from the suite entry to the coffee maker to the copier to the water fountain. You know, it's amazing when you stop and think about how many things people touch every day in the office, and how to consider what rules should be made around them. Second is we're recommending the 6-foot CDC WHO physical distancing space, which again would not allow for 100% reentry day one. Second part of that is one-way circulation. That may seem not logical at first, but I think it can be handled relatively easily. And I think if everyone's on board of why we're doing it, it shouldn't be that complicated. We're also recommending a safe desk, which I'll talk about in a minute, where we do, again, this being a temporary situation, we do recommend some modifications to everyone's personal space. And finally, to have safe and equitable collaboration. You know, we're talking about not only going to work to collaborate, but the people that you might need to collaborate might be home. So to ensure that they are involved and just as active and part of the conversations as the people who are physically together. So the safe desk, what is a safe desk? For SmithGroup, it's a seat that's provided that is away from the main circulation, meets the 6-foot guidelines, has a clean surface with keyboard, mouse, phone removed, but monitors provided. Keep in mind that these seats, that the desk that you left when you left the office may not be a safe desk because of where it is, or it may not be a safe desk because your neighbor also wants to come back to the office. So we think for the ultimate flexibility and the ultimate safety, that these safe desks may not be the ones that you had when you left. So we do recommend clearing the personal effects from your desk for now, so there is a better opportunity to keep the space more clean. Also, there should be policies put in place on how long someone would sit at this desk. For many reasons, including anxiety, we would not recommend that this be a completely agile environment where every day you would sit at a new desk, but that maybe there'd be a 1 or 2 week period where you're at that desk, and then as more people come in, you may need to relocate. You can go to the next one. So in addition to the personal space, you know, to rethink the collaboration zones, not only the conference rooms, but also the open seating areas. It's important that they follow the same guidelines as we did for the personal space. So, you know, an 8-person conference room might only accommodate 2 or 3 people right now. The other thing to consider is, again, those remote employees. So if the space is out in the open or in a meeting room, it really has to have the right technology, such as video camera or WebEx, so that any of the remote workers that you need to collaborate with do feel just as active and part of the conversation as the people who are there together. So this is an interesting tool that SmithGroup has recently developed, and we're just starting to roll it out to our clients. It's called Disto, and what it does is it can take most Revit and AutoCAD plans, and we can run a Dynamo script on it, where the script looks for all the seats in the plan as is, and then based on the distancing you would like to have between people, can run through hundreds of scenarios relatively quickly, provide you with 4 or 5 options to get the most density at the safest density, I guess I should say, for that, and also considers the one-way circulation or the main traffic pattern. So I'm sure everybody on this call has taken out a circle template and tried to do this themselves, and we just want to say that this is something that is coming out, you'll see soon, and if you're interested, please get in touch. The next plan is showing kind of the result of the tool, where we applied it to one of the floors in our Washington, DC office. So running the tool and having a few other parameters, such as adding sneeze guards between the benching desks. We're able to achieve the density you see in blue, still meeting all the guidelines. It also has applied the one-way circulation pattern. And then the spaces in green are the acceptable spacing for collaboration stations. What you see in the top left is actually taking the plan's west-hand side and making it more of a collaborative space. This goes back to all the information you've gathered so far, in that, you know, this is showing we have the potential for 47 seats on this floor. If we only have 25 people that want to come back day one, but 50 people feel it's important to collaborate once or twice per week, you know, you really have to consider changing the way your plan works, and maybe the workstation area or the me space area becomes more of a we space for the time being. In addition to the architectural and furniture changes, there's great opportunity with engineering and HVAC, both within your space and in the building. In addition to wearing the masks, you can add higher MERV rated filters to your boxes within the space. Also, UV lighting at the VAV source does tend to kill most of the aerosols. And it's been widely reported, and I believe recommended by ASHRAE, that increasing humidity also helps with the delaying the transference of the disease through the air. That's kind of HVAC inside, and that kind of rolls into talking to your landlord. If you are not a building owner, no more than the public transit question earlier, you know, your employees getting to work are only as safe as outside your office as someone else has decided. So it's really important before you go back to talk to the landlord about what their timeline is, what their protocols will be for the building, for checking in, for elevators. Have they considered changing the way they run their HVAC system? Have they considered changing their cleaning protocols? Will there be temperature checks coming in? All those things that as a tenant, you will technically be required to follow, or could be considerations on when you re-enter, and it's important to let your staff know what they will be experiencing through the lobby as well.
So Bob and Rob shared a lot about the physical considerations, and now we want to just touch on the policy and process that we should all be thinking about. First area of concern really is around this new way of working. If really 70% of our employees are expecting to work from home, they've been effective working from home, this is the biggest aspect in terms of policy that most companies will have to deal with. Once you establish through the survey your populations in your buildings and your tenant spaces, there's a whole set of issues around managing who's in the office at what time, where are they sitting, is there a rotation system, as Rob mentioned, so that people can stay in a safe desk as long as possible. You know, policy around space usage and distancing, kind of establishing some rules of the road so that people know what to expect when they come back and how to use the spaces and remain safe doing so. And I think we touched on it earlier, but should also be included in terms of policy, some of the actual technology requirements that you'll need to think through with your organization. Other policy considerations are really around health and safety, instructing employees, you know, with signage, how to use these new spaces. That should be up and running before anyone returns to work. Hygiene and safety instruction at key points throughout the space, sharing with the staff what are the cleaning protocols, both for their individual clean desk as well as what's going to be done at a company-wide level in terms of cleaning the area to ensure their safety. Also, what are the specific personal protection equipment requirements that your organization will enforce? We're finding that, you know, there's a wide range of thought on this, and we believe it's very important to be explicit and clear throughout your whole organization in this regard. And then lastly, under policy, there's several things that kind of fall under legal and HR policies that should be delineated in, a guideline resource. So things like employee travel. When will you allow and expect your staff to be able to travel again? What about all the guests and visitors that come into your facility or used to come into the facility? Will they be required to wear the same kind of PPE as your staff? Food policy, again, for safety reasons, but wrapped food, changing water coolers, things like that are all part of this. Legal concerns. Every organization has its own unique set of concerns in how their employees deal with other people during this time, as well as maybe attend other client and customer sites. HIPAA requirements, the whole notion of confidentiality, but yet outlining a plan for what's to be expected when we return to our physical workplace.
So stating the changes we're about to embark on is a complex one, is probably a huge understatement. And I think that's why all the more reason to really craft a thoughtful transition plan is an important aspect. And that plan has to be mindful of, as we iterated from the beginning of the session, is to be evolving around employees' mental and social well-being is an important aspect. I mean, knowing as of 2019, I think 83% of U.S. workers suffer from work-related stress, and nearly $300 billion of loss happens for U.S. businesses as a result of workplace stress. It's no surprise in this recent survey that we found that 70% of employees indicate this pandemic is the most stressful time of their entire career. But it's also interesting to know that that's kind of outlines what the employees are seeking from the employer perspective, that all of the organization must focus on supporting that mental well-being. That will be the key to sort of rising to the top. So that's from the individual perspective, but there's sort of the social aspect that creates an organization's culture, right? And that sort of speaks to network that is already there at multiple levels and multiple scales. And it's important to craft the sort of the right boundaries, but also strengthen the cultural network that you already have, and to really address that to move forward in a positive light. They could include anything from supporting and training the leaders to be better leaders, to have empathy, simple things as strengthening teams to share responsibilities across the board, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of an individual from emotional intelligence perspective, as well as, I mean, I think we're all kind of a victim of sort of what's called the Zoom fatigue that we all have. And it's also important to then find those social respite for our employees, and then continue to connect at a level of providing equity as a resource, and discover that there's continuous growth that could happen through supporting learning and making that progress visible. We often get into, when we provide change management, is to first analyze, what are your strengths and weaknesses, but also find opportunities, as well as looking at the threats to really enable and find those, elevate and address the issues of inhibitor as well. I think the opportunity here, while there are many facets of the organization and workplace change that we need to address, is to look at the positive that this is a moment that we can really redefine the definition of a workplace that's much broader than what we typically have looked at in the past, beyond the physical space and beyond the physical office environment. And how do we actually provide those choices, and think about the mind shift that we need to do as both leaders and employees, to give that foundational choices broader than what we used to see. I think ultimately it will actually enable and creating the agile and nimble organization overall, from top to bottom, will be the organization that is ready for any change that is to come. And lastly, when you think about creating those change programs, I think the careful sort of choreography between different facets of change elements will be important. either all the way from the top, there's consistent key messaging and setting the tone of the approach from the firm-wide sessions is one. At a local level, tactical roadmaps and things that you need to address and training that's offered is also important. But not last, but not least, sort of speaking about that empathy aspect. How do we create a culture and elevate conversation to really from top to bottom, sort of have empathy across the board, because there's so many unknowns as we all know it, and every individual is unique and their situation is different. And to start the conversation by addressing that will really, and all of those programs working together will provide the sort of the holistic approach and support through this important transition.
Going forward, one of the thoughts that we had was just recognizing that this isn't going to be the last time that we experience something like this. I know that's a scary thing to say, but you're already, if you're up on the news and the articles, probably hearing about discussions about, is this coming back in the fall, or what's going to happen if we ever read. So I know a lot of organizations have set up emergency response plans. In case a data center goes out, or in case a city or a region or a state lose power, what do? I can't tell you that I've seen or talked to too many people that have set up planning at the scale of what we just experienced. So what we're suggesting is that we want to come out of this better than we are today, or than we were before this started. And if we are going to come out of this better than what we were, then let's think through a set of scenarios that we build in organizational flexibility, not just planning flexibility within our work environment, but within our organization, so that when we start to see a resurgence, or perhaps the next time we hear about some virus on the other side of the world, and we notice that the conversation about it is not going away, what do we as an organization do to start to initiate a flexible response that allows us to keep working fluidly? And this is kind of the big picture thinking ahead, is to get to a point where when we come back from it, whatever it is, that we are not the same, and we anticipate that we're not going to be the same, and we build in the ability to be flexible that way. So this is a generic bell curve, but the key thing to recognize is that not only the different phases, but also the fact that the beginning line is not the same as the ending line, that we are going to be different. And so just kind of from our perspective as we go forward, is this idea of building in resilience. And if you go on the next slide, this idea that from SmithGroup's perspective, building resilience is adaptability, as well as really thinking through and thinking about how to mitigate the issue. So not only are we going to adapt, but we're going to mitigate, and AKA build resilience. And so the thought that we have is to build resilience at all levels of our organization, both in the physical planning, in the policies that we're making, as well as in the organization itself, so that we can really disrupt in the future rather than be the ones that are disrupted.
So to leave you with this thought, we're focusing on how do we be more human, be more flexible, and be better throughout this process. I think a lot of what we shared is what we're thinking, our point of view on how we can design our own future in a way that's better than it is today. And would just encourage you all to really reflect, and instead of being overwhelmed with the challenges that lie ahead in getting staff back into the offices, that we really use this opportunity to design a better future. So with that, Amy, I know you've been kind of checking in on all the questions that have come in, so we'll turn it over to you to ask a few questions from the audience.
Yes. So there are some big picture questions and then some more tactical questions. I'll try and field them as best as I can. A few folks have asked if the presentation is going to be available, and yes, we can share sometime this afternoon the presentation for you to refer back to. So Bob, question for you. How do you define temporary as the 3 months or 1 year that was mentioned earlier? start with
Sure.
a tricky one.
Yeah, it's actually a great question. Fundamental to all of us. When we thought about it, we tried to be thoughtful and to say, okay, so what are the different ways that we could look at what temporary means? You know, one aspect of temporary would be short term, 2 to 3 months, because what Lee's mentioned at the beginning is we don't know what the future holds. Um, we're already hearing that Google and Facebook and others are saying temporary is going to be till the end of the year. We're going to allow the employees that can to work from home till the end of the year. What we're suggesting in this model is to really develop a strategy that's individual to the organization and to be based on what the staff are saying. So what we're seeing is that the initial comeback move, if you will, is really built in with a lot of apprehension, and so that the office in the short term is not going to be really densely occupied if you approach it from a human-centric perspective, from an employee-centric perspective. But the need to tackle surveys incrementally is going to be key, because what is going to happen if you do it right is that as staff start to feel better about coming back to the office, you're going to start to find that people are going to want to come back. And so that notion of temporary is going to go from, you know, an undetermined distance that as time goes by, it's going to continue to shorten because you're going to get more and more staff. It's going to require organizational flexibility in the planning that allows more and more staff to come back. And that time frame, I can't answer that for every organization. I say it's inappropriate to say it's 3 months, boom, this is it, and then we're back to normal. It's also inappropriate to say it's going to be next year and we're back to normal. I'd say let the employees and the staff start to tell you.
Thank you. Rob, how high are the sneeze guards you added to the bench seating?
Um, I have seen them as high as 30 inches available. However, there are two ways, and it depends on your furniture configuration, how you could do it. If they are freestanding pieces, they're usually only 20 to 24 inches tall. If you can actually replace some kind of screen you have at your bench, I believe I've seen them as tall as 30. That has a lot to do with, you know, IFMA and OSHA requirements. So I'm sure right now everyone would love to have them 5 feet tall, but there's also the reality of that safety to be considered as well. So I believe for the DC plan, with the furniture system we have, we can get 30 inches, which when you add to the countertop, that would be 60 inches or 5 feet seated.
Hey, Rob, if I could just also add in, the one thing to consider is height adjustability on your desks.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have height adjustable desks, the screen either might need to be attached to the desk, or you might need to unplug your desks and not let them be used for height adjustable in the short term, right?
Absolutely.
And then there's a lot of questions coming in about expectations from a landlord perspective. So, any recommendations on what we believe they can and should do to improve the safety and comfort of the tenants? Rob or Bob, do you want to take that one?
One thought that I had was, and I was kind of checking the questions out ahead of time, so it's not like I just came up with this off the cuff, but um, was the thought that from a policy perspective, what we deal with visitors. So especially in multi-tenant buildings, if as a landlord we can figure out a way to manage visitors, if we're going to screen them for temperature, or if we're going to force them to sign in and ask questions, if we can manage that at the building entry level, um, then as a tenant, I don't have to deal with that at the reception desk as much, because otherwise I have to reconfigure my whole reception area to accommodate a safe space for my reception person, as well as to make sure that I'm doing those questioning and whatever else internally. So if there can be an alignment, that's one thought that I had that would be really helpful from a building owner perspective.
And then as a follow-up to that, if you're a building owner, how do you recommend those folks move forward with specifically the elevators and entering and exiting safely and the queue and line and all of that?
We have
Bob, you want to answer that one? Because that's a hard question.
the reality is we, as a country haven't gone back yet. So I think part of it is we're not sure, it's a hard balance. The photo that Bob showed of all the X's on the floors and the chairs is really not what you want to come back to, but there is, I think if it can be done in a positive way, I think there is a feeling of safety and comfort knowing that the building is considering your safety as well, not just your employer. So there's signage that can go on the floor, the wall to kind of show the separation. Believe it or not, there are these tools out there that now are like little almost like a bottle opener or a little corkscrew. And what it allows you to do is have it in your pocket so that you can hit the buttons without actually using your fingers. So I think I have no doubt that in the next few weeks, there will be so much creativity around these kind of tools and apparatus and ideas that will make it much safer to go back.
And I think just, when we think about how things changed in airports after 9/11, we're going to see a similar shift in our base buildings at the entry level there. Whether you're going through a temperature scanner that's just to something like, okay, we do this now, to, landlords delineating how elevators are used, we're going to get used to it pretty quickly.
I think also working with tenants to look at staggered start times and really trying to flatten the curve in its own way in that respect.
Yes. Lise, there's a question here about if companies encourage people temporarily to work from home, either part-time or full-time, depending on, each company's space availability. What do you believe is the responsibility of the company to make their home spaces, their home workspaces, ergonomic and efficient? She went on to say, working from home at your kitchen table is not the same as you have in the office. Is there a liability to improve those spaces?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's one that we're encountering, in our own return to our workplace. I think at a minimum, having employees have the appropriate technology. We talked about that equitable participation in team meetings and that sort of thing. But it could also run the gamut from employees expecting for now the company to pay for internet and electricity and everything else to the nth degree. So I think striking that balance at a minimum of providing the appropriate technology to participate. And then secondly, depending on the company, offering some assistance to create a more comfortable ergonomic environment.
Alexis, this one's for you. Do you think the office environment may become the place where the creative interactions happen rather than individual heads down work? If yes, does that not change the idea of what the whole purpose of the office really is?
It does. It's actually, again, another great question that we've been trying to answer as well. But I think, from even the survey, yes, people are definitely missing that collaboration, creativity. How do we, create together and innovate? That's definitely a big chunk. But when you think about, again, the equity, there are many demographic that actually is struggling at home to do the effective focus work. So we want to balance that it is also and always going to be about both me and we. And so that your space is not off kilter and only focused on the other aspect. Because then I think that you just ruled out kind of having that equity in mind. I do also believe the way we look at that individual focus work and how we provide that space in the physical workplace may actually shift. I know there's been a lot of sort of articles about maybe, it's the death of the open office concept, and we may all be going back to private offices. But even in that notion, I don't think the answer is that simple. It's about right sizing and appropriate providing what those options are for even the individual work and how it can happen safely is another layer I think we need to consider.
I would just add, I think it's just like every other trend, I mean, this is a trend that was forced upon us, but I think it always starts out in the extreme and levels itself out. So while it will not be exactly the same, I think especially once this is over, it'll be different, but it won't be radically different, in my opinion.
And then Bob, there's a lot of questions on here regarding eating, lunch hour, cafeteria, how to deal with those types of spaces, and the fact that people need to eat when they go to work.
Well, it was funny because we were joking the other day that if you're requiring masks in the office, you're going to have to make them have flaps so that you can eat while keeping your mask on, right? And we're kind of tongue in cheek, but it's an interesting challenge because in a lot of organizations recently, what we've been seeing is a rule to start going back to eating in a communal way. And having communal spaces for eating to reinforce organizational culture, especially in progressive organizations where that's really key. They did not want people eating at their desks, and so now like the big question is, are we going to see kind of a move back to eating at the desk? If you're going to eat staggering shift times, or knowing that you're going to eat staggering times for lunch, and I think this does, it's kind of new, haven't really experienced it yet because we're all trying to get our heads around coming back to the office. But based on the surveys that we're seeing and the fact that a good chunk of general people aren't really interested in coming back yet, it's going to be a slow buildup. And so it might not be as big of an issue as we anticipate, knowing that the kitchens are an issue. None of us designed kitchens that were 12 feet wide to make sure that you could get multiple people in there. And so having the zone of a kitchen, a kitchenette, pantry, whatever you call them, with the microwaves, and kind of staggering a few times to allow people to spread out is really what's going to be key. There is a common sense factor to this that we're also talking about organizationally. You don't have to tell everybody every little detail, but that goes to Alexis's point about the change management and the training and talking it through to establish those protocols.
Rob, how soon might a client be able to test the Disto tool that you talked about?
Right now, it's available right now. It's ready. So I think if you have a contact at SmithGroup, get in touch with them or get in touch with me. I did read ahead on the questions as well, and it is not an app. So it is not a tool that you would use yourself. So what we would need is, as I said, a Revit or AutoCAD background of your space, and then we can run the tool ourselves and provide you the results.
Thank you. And there's a couple questions in here about, more future looking at real estate as a whole and square foot per person and where that's headed. Lise, if you could talk about where do you see that going generally? And someone specifically asked, for a company that's beginning to look at new leases right now, what recommendations would you give to them?
Yeah, so we're seeing, just in our preliminary test of square footage per person going from what used to be usable, say 140 to 160 or 70 square foot per person, jumping up to close to 300 and even beyond in some cases, depending on the risk point. So really doubling square foot per person, but that is offset by the number of people that are ready to return to work right now. So for the short term, I really think it's going to be balanced. Fewer people wanting to get back in will balance out with the amount of safe seats, given the additional square footage required. But in terms of talking to landlords, I think really tenants are now in the driver's seat, number one, for shorter lease terms. I think landlords are going to be seeing, in general, companies folding. It's already happened. They're going to have higher vacancy rates it's going to be a tenant market in the coming year for sure. So it's time to look at more flexibility from your landlord to be able to then, either take on more space or shed more space as you need in the future.
Great. Somebody asked if we could share the examples of the survey questions. Her organization is interested in doing this, but wants to do it the right way. Lise, do you want to take that one as well?
Sure. I think, we're not going to share the exact survey, but we would be happy to talk to any individual organization as to the kinds of things that they may want to consider. But I don't think we can share the entire survey in a public format.
Okay. And then Alexis, can you give examples of communication plans for this situation? How would you recommend companies communicate better between, partly physical, partly remote workforce, and, a concern of not adding to email fatigue, et cetera?
Sure. So the communication plan, when you are looking at change management program, has to be looked at in conjunction with other training and sessions and engagements you want to do, so they don't work in its silos. But to focus on the communication plan alone, I think the approach has to be, think of it as an engagement with your staff. So there are three kind of hierarchical scale from the organization as a whole. There needs to be kind of dissemination of information, but also getting a feel for where the employees are by doing all hands. And even at SmithGroup, we encourage our leadership to actually, because it had been a while since the staff actually saw the leadership, through the video conferencing. We actually did an online video conferencing. So you want to balance not only kind of sending messages out, but with, sort of personal touch of seeing the leadership with the WebEx platform. And then at a local level, you want to craft messaging that is sort of working in conjunction with the entire organization in how the messages are going out. And so you can incrementally plug in the local level information the staff wants to and want to know. So you're not kind of over doing the sort of more detailed local level communication with the all staff messaging. And then last but not least, you want to kind of build upon getting some feedback, which I know Bob and Rob and Lise talked about, the survey, using that as a platform. Not that you want to over survey people, because that's also like creative fatigue. Use that as a platform to engage, and you want to, from the position of you want to hear from the staff. So you want to create just as much as this disseminating information platform, as much as getting the feedback as well, and so you balance both.
Okay, and I think we'll just end on one more question. And for this one, I'll go to Bob. If you discourage using, the red X's on furniture and tables, et cetera, what do you recommend? How do you recommend we show people what they can and cannot use in a positive way?
I was actually talking to my wife about this, and we were having a conversation over dinner, and so from her mouth, she's like, isn't there a way that you can use like architecture and furniture and just visual things could lead people to do the right thing without being overt about it? So and that's coming from an occupational therapist. So the great big picture is to use cues. Perhaps, is there a planter with a discrete line that goes along with training, and the planter is in the way of the kind of the line over to the microwave, so that people know that, hey, I'm supposed to stop here while the microwave is being used. And it's a combination of both training as well as cues. Somebody in our office was talking about using little dots, little blue dots over on the table that's supposed to be used. That's the safe seat. Rather than big X's on the spaces that you're not. Removing some furniture might also be a short-term good solution, right? Pulling off, moving the chairs, or just putting a little, removing the monitor, unplugging the technology can also be a cue that if it doesn't have technology, that it's a good strategy. Or it says I'm not supposed to sit there. And so if you're giving people the ability to take a monitor or to take a seat home temporarily, identify the safety needs first and then let them take the others, and it works in tandem.
Thank you so much. Lise, do you want to close us out?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for your time this morning. Great questions. I hope we've shared a little bit from our point of view that might be helpful to you as you're planning your own reentry into the office space. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like anything answered that we didn't get to today. Thank you very much.